My name's Jeffrey. I'll be going over another list of economics questions for you guys. And so today we're just going to look at micro macro questions that have been commonly asked, going over the answers, picking the right one, and then seeing whether or not we match with what previous tutor has said. So we can just jump right into it. The first question says, suppose the own price elasticity of demand for good X is -5, its income elasticity is -3, and its advertising elasticity is 3, and the cross price elasticity of demand between it and good Y is 5. Determine how much the consumption of this good will change if, and the instructions are to enter your answers as percentages, include a minus sign for all negative answers, and then we have A, B, C, and D. A says that the price of good X decreases by 6%. B says the price of good Y increases by 7%. C says that advertising decreases by 4%. And D says income increases by 2%. So what we're really asked to do here is to understand different types of elasticity. And as long as you understand one of the general format of elasticity equations, whether it be income elasticity or elasticity of demand, as long as you understand the general idea of elasticity, we can answer any of these questions, no matter if it's something we don't really talk about, like advertising elasticity or price elasticity, which is part A. So let's take a look at what the first question is going to tell us. So, see, my mouse is not working. That's working. It's just this isn't working. Give me one moment. What's going on? Okay, so we're just gonna not deal with that for now. Okay, so for the first question here, price elasticity, we just want to know a general equation for elasticity, right? So we know that in general, elasticity is given by, or elasticity of demand, and my thing is still messing around here. The elasticity of demand is equal to the percentage change in quantity demanded divided by the percentage change in price, right? And so this is our general elasticity of demand equation. And so for this one, we can easily substitute this in. We know that the own price elasticity of demand for this good is -5. So we can set this equal to -5. And the next thing we can do is plug in, well, we already know the price of the good is decreasing by 6%, so this would be -6. So we have -6 divided by the change in P is equal to -5. So it should be something like P is equal, the percentage change in P should be equal to about 6 divided by 5, or 6/5%. Right? So let's take a look at what the previous tutor said. And so, oh, sorry, not 6/5. The price of the good is decreasing by 6%. That's the price, not the quantity change. So it would be percent change in quantity divided by 6 is equal to -5, and therefore the percentage change in quantity will be 30% increase, right? And so that'll be the way we solve this. My bad for that mistake. That was silly. And so taking a look at the previous year's answers, we can see that matches up very well with what they put. The change in quantity demand is equal to 30, of -5 equals the percentage change in quantity demand divided by -6. Cross multiply and you get 30%. So that's totally fine, and that's conventionally what we think of for elasticity. And basically what we'll do is we'll just apply the same process to all the other types of elasticity, because elasticity structure is fairly similar regardless of if you're talking about demand or income or advertising or cross price, right? It's simply going to be the percentage change in quantity demanded for good X divided by the percentage change of whatever the other variable is. So let's take a look at B. I think B is referring to the cross price elasticity of demand. And so basically, instead of saying percentage change in Q divided by percentage change in P, we would say percentage change in QX divided by percentage change in PY. So how does a change in the price of good Y affect the quantity demanded for good X? And that's what we refer to as cross-price elasticity. So the structure stays relatively similar. You're just introducing a second goods price instead of one good only. And so with that, we do the exact same process. Like we set this, we know that the cross-price elasticity is equal to 5, right? And so we set the price of good, percentage change in price of good Y is equal to 7. And so we would get something like 35% increase in quantity demanded, right? So taking a look at what the previous tutor said, they also said 35%, so we're totally fine here. And we'll take the same logic, apply this to part C. Part C says advertising elasticity. This is not something that you usually see, but again, as long as we understand what elasticity refers to, the responsiveness of demand, then it doesn't really matter. We know that the advertising elasticity is 3. We can assume that the advertising elasticity equation is percentage change in quantity demanded divided by percentage change in advertising expenditure. If it's advertising expenditure it goes up by 4%, then we know that the overall change in quantity demanded is going to be 3 times 4, or 12%. Taking a look at the previous year's answer, we see that that is correct. And finally, D says income increases by 2%. Income elasticity is -3. We know that the change in quantity demanded is going to be 6%, right? And so that's going to be our -6%. So that's going to be our answer for part D. And so for part D, we see that demand of good X will change by -6% if income increases by 2%. So all these answers really just depend on our understanding of elasticity as a concept of responsiveness of quantity demanded to a change in some other variable. And so all these answers are correct, and we have nothing to really correct the previous tutor on because we matched all of their answers. Okay, let's take a look at the next question. So the next question says, which of the following would reduce the supply of microcomputers? A technological improvement that lowers the cost of producing computers. B, higher wage rates for the workers that assemble the computers. C, a reduction in the price of computer chips used to produce computers. Or D, a reduction in the price of computers. And so let's take a look at it and break this down. So reducing the supply of microcomputers refers to a leftward shift of the supply curve. You would see it on the graph as something like this, right? We have a supply curve, and it would shift to the left by some degree. Basically, a reduction in quantity supplied at every single price point. And so what could lead to that? Part A says, or answer choice A says, a technological improvement which lowers the cost of production. Well, we know that lowering the cost of production isn't going to decrease supply. It's actually going to increase supply because suppliers can afford to hear back more about, can afford to produce more at every single price level because it costs them less to produce the same type of good. B says, so A is not going to be right. B says a higher wage rate for workers that assemble computers. And this seems like a competitive answer, right? A higher wage rate, well, wages are a factor of production. You have to pay the workers to create your computers. And if you pay the workers more, then that means the cost of production has gone up. And therefore, the amount that you can supply at every price level goes down since it's now more expensive to create the same good. So B seems like a really good answer, but we can take a look at the other two answers just to be sure. C says a reduction in the price of computer chips used to produce computers. And so again, this is a factor of input of production, right? If computer chips are necessary to produce computers and there's a reduction in their price, then it becomes cheaper for a producer to just produce these computers. And so we would expect a rightward shift, not a leftward shift in the supply curve here. So it's not going to be C. And finally, D says a reduction in the price of computers. And this would be more so an interaction of supply and demand. It's a simple reduction in the price of computers is not going to reduce the supply of microcomputers. And we would also see that if it were just restricted to the supply curve, a reduction in price of computers does nothing to reduce the supply of microcomputers, rather it reduces the quantity supply of microcomputers. And that's a big distinction. Right? A reduction in supply is a shift of the entire curve. It means lowering your production at every single price level, whereas a reduction in the price of computers leading to a reduction in quantity supplied is simply a shift along or a movement along the supply curve from a higher price point to a lower price point. And so that change is simply that reduction in quantity supplied, not a reduction in overall supply. So B is going to be the best answer here because it fits the context that we're looking for, a reduction in the supply overall of microcomputers. Let's take a look at the previous tutor said. The previous tutor said these are some of the factors that affect the supply of a product, like price, technology, cost of production, transport condition, and government policies. In the question, we need to find a reason that would reduce the supply of microcomputers. Option A is not the correct option because it increases the supply. That's true. Option C is not the correct option because it reduces the cost of production and increases the supply of microcomputers. That's also true. Option D is not the correct option because the price of mini computers reduces the production, not the price of the computer. I think that was a misread there. I think when they said a reduction in the price of computers, they're talking about microcomputers already. And so that's something we can clarify, that distinction between quantity supplied and overall supply shifts. Option B is the correct option because if the wage rate increases, then the cost of production increases, which leads to a fall in the supply of microcomputers. Option D is incorrect because it would lead to a movement along the supply curve, not a reduction in supply overall at every price level. But other than that, the correct answer is there and the rationale is correct, so we can mark that as correct. Okay, next question. Globalization has the largest effect on A, politics, B, the economy, C, employment, or D, business. So what globalization refers to is basically the opening up of a global marketplace where countries are more interdependent on each other, and there's less so this idea of independent or isolated or domestic economies, and more so an idea of this web of interconnected economies that make up the global economy, right? And so this is primarily applicable to the economic concept of international trade, right? The idea of comparative advantage or specialization, that as you open up more trade, you allow people to specialize in things that are good at producing at low with a comparative advantage in, and they don't have to produce as much, and they can trade for goods they have a less of an advantage in. That's what globalization really applies to. And so we can see that globalization is a very economically based concept. It probably affects politics, employment, and business as well. But it affects the economy most of all because it affects the trade balance, it affects what types of goods or production that a country's industries focus in, and by extension, it will affect the rest of the options given. And so B is going to be the best answer here for sure. Let's take a look at the previous year's answer. Previous year said that the globalization is a word used to show the interaction between two or more than two countries for transacting goods and services. It increases the interdependence between two or more than two economies, the area where all the activities related to production, consumption, distribution, and trade of goods and services occurred by different economic agents like individuals, businesses, and governments is known as an economy. So we can say that globalization has the largest effect on the economy, where politics, business, and employment are parts of an economy. Therefore, option B is the correct option. Yeah, sure. I think that kind of sums it up. Yeah, so that'll be fine. And nothing inherently wrong with that, so we'll just agree with that and mark that as correct. The next question says, when an economist says that the demand for a product has increased, this means that, and so what that really is referring to is the translation for distinguishing a increase in demand and an increase in quantity demanded. So an increase in quantity demanded simply means that there's been some sort of price change and more of a quantity has been demanded, right? As the name might suggest. What we mean when we say that demand for a product has increased, what we really mean is that quantity demanded for this good has increased at every single price level for this market or good. And so that's what we're looking for in the answer choices. Let's take a look at the previous year's answer. Previous year says that when an economist says that the demand for a product has increased, this means that the level of quantity demanded of the products are greater at each possible monetary value of products. That's true. That's basically what we said. And so according to the law of demand, the level of quantity demanded is inversely proportional to the price of the product. When the price of a normal good increases or decreases, the quantity demanded will decrease or increase. Demand for a good or service is influenced by different factors such as the income of the consumer, the price of related goods, preferences of consumers, future expectations, population growth, etc. Yeah, that's great. So we can mark that as right. Next question says, how might a drop in price for washing machines affect the demand for dryers? So one says the demand for dryers would have no relation to changing prices of washing machines. 2 says that the demand for dryers will most likely increase as the price for washing machines dropped. 3 says the demand for dryers will most likely decrease as the price for washing machines dropped. And 4 says the demand for dryers would only be affected by an increase in the price of washing machines. And so here we're asked to identify kind of like a hypothetical relationship between washing machines and dryers. And so we would say normally, if you're in the market for a washing machine, you're also in the market for dryers, right? If you can only wash your clothes but you can't dry them, that would make your life really hard. And similarly, if you were only drying your clothes but not washing them, then that would also be kind of counterintuitive, right? You wouldn't really be cleaning your clothes. And so we can say that most likely washing machines and dryers are complements. They're goods that are bought together. And so once we identify that relationship, the next step becomes predicting how a price drop for washing machines will affect a complement good. So, well, let's break this down. If the price drops for washing machines, what happens to the quantity demanded for washing machines? Well, the quantity demanded for washing machines will definitely go up, right? Law of demand tells us that when price goes down, quantity demanded goes up. Okay. So quantity demanded goes up for washing machines. Well, the next step is, okay, we know that people buy washing machines and dryers together. So if they're buying more washing machines, then the demand for dryers must also be going up as well. So that will actually lead to an increase in demand for dryers, a rightward shift in demand curve. And so that's going to be the end of result for a dryer market. So we're going to look for an answer choice that says that the market for dryers experiences an increase in demand because the price for washing machines has gone down. So let's take a look. So 1 says no relation, that's not correct. 2 says demand will go up because the price goes down for washing machines. That seems to be the right answer, but let's take a look at 3 and 4. 3 says decrease, that's not true. And 4 says only affected by an increase in the price of washing machines, and that's not true either. So 2 is going to be the best answer here. Because demand for dryers will most likely increase as the price for washing machines drops. Let's take a look at the previous year's answer. So the previous year said that the demand for dryers will most likely increase as the price for washing machines dropped. Washing machines and dryers can be considered complementary goods that are used together in a certain combination. Demand for a good is inversely related to the price of its complement. When a drop in the price for washing machines is observed, there's an increase in the quantity demanded according to the law of demand, right? The increase in quantity demanded of washing machines necessitates the need for a greater number of dryers, leading to an increase in their demand. The decrease in price leads to a downward movement along the demand curve for washing machines and shifts the demand curve for dryers to the right. Perfect. Nothing wrong there. We can mark that as correct. The next question says, which of the following institutions oversees the safety and stability of the U.S. banking system? 1 says the Federal Reserve, 2 says the Federal Funds Committee, 3 says the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, enforced as the Federal Financial Institutions Examination Council. So this is really just a definition-based question. The correct answer is the Federal Reserve. They're a regulatory body that regulates the banking system. They regulate commercial banks. They regulate the federal funds rate. And so there's a lot of things that they're doing here to kind of make sure that the stability, that the banking system is very stable. And so let's take a look at the previous tutor's answer. Previous tutor said the Federal Reserve as well. So the Federal Reserve System is the monetary authority and the central bank of the United States of America that governs the monetary policy of the economy. It is tasked with the responsibility of overseeing and regulating the commercial banking system of the country, stabilizing the financial system, determining the availability of money in the market by influencing the credit creation ability of financial institutions through various monetary policy tools, such as open market operations, discount rate, reserve ratio, federal funds rate, etc., and providing financial services to the government of the United States, depository institutions, and foreign official institutions. Great. Good summary. And yeah, this is really just a definition-based question for us to kind of know the definition for. The next question says, a goal of financial regulatory agencies is to 1. Ensure safety at the workplace, 2. Prevent the creation of monopolies, 3. Protect the environment, and 4. All of the above. And so, there are definitely regulatory agencies that are designed to ensure all of these things, right? But for specifically financial regulatory agencies, you might think of the Federal Trade Commission or the Securities and Exchange Commission. Those are going to be really focused on the creation of monopolies. And then 2 is going to be the correct answer here. Financial regulatory agencies are less so concerned about workplace safety or about environmental protection, maybe like the EPA, and more so concerned about monopolies. So right now, we can think of the current investigations by some financial regulatory agencies into the tech industry for whether certain tech companies are too big. That's what they're doing. These regulatory agencies are looking to prevent monopolies from existing. And so 2 is going to be the correct answer here. Let's take a look at the previous tutor's answer. Previous tutor also picked 2, and they said that the regulation of financial institutions by the government through a number of requirements, restrictions, and guidelines is known as financial regulation, which is carried out to ensure the integrity of the financial system. The primary motive of financial regulation is to maintain consumer confidence in the financial system, contribute to its stabilization, and protect consumer welfare by keeping a check on market power of institutions and preventing them from monopolizing an industry. Federal Reserve System is the monetary authority of the United States, one of the primary financial regulatory authorities. Okay, good. Mark that as correct. Next question says, which statement accurately describes debts and deficits? Check all that apply. Number 1, A says debt is free and does not affect a government. B says a government's budget deficit causes its debts to increase. C says a government's budget deficit causes debts to decrease. D says debt requires the government to pay back more than it has borrowed. And E says the deficit is the amount government spends above what it brings in. And so let's quickly go over the definitions of debt and deficit. It's an important distinction and they cannot be used interchangeably. Debt refers to, or let's start with deficit. Deficit refers to an annual difference between expenditure and revenue by the government. If the government spends more money than it receives in tax revenue, then it runs a deficit, which means it has to borrow money to make up the rest of its spending, right? Just like you and me, if we spent more money than we made at our job, then we would have to borrow money to cover the rest of our spending. So the government's borrowing to cover that annual deficit is called a deficit. And so that's something that happens on a year-to-year basis. You can have a deficit one year, not a deficit another year, although the government traditionally runs a deficit every year, historically. The next question is, okay, so we know what a deficit is, an annual difference. What about debt? So debt is if you took all of the historical deficits we've ever run up, and you added them all up together, and you subtracted the amount that we've paid off of those deficits, or the amount that we've paid off our loans for that borrowing, and you get the debt. So it's the overall sum total of what the government might owe this year, right? And so right now, I actually haven't looked this up recently, but I think the debt is around $17 or $18 trillion. It's actually probably larger. But So that's how much the United States government owes overall right now through all the borrowing we've ever done to different countries or different institutions or different debtors, right? Basically, people who hold our debt. And the other number, deficits, is simply in this year or last year, how much more did we spend than we made in? I think it was around $1 trillion, right? And so that's the big difference between the two. And that $1 trillion will be added to the deficit overall. Okay, so now we understand the difference. Let's take a look at the previous year's let's take a look at the answer choices. A says that debt is free and does not affect the government, and that's false. Like, debt is not free, right? You have to borrow money from somebody, whether it be from American bondholders or from other countries or from the Social Security deposits, Social Security Reserve Fund. Debt has to come from somewhere, and so it's not free, and it does affect the government because debt not only needs to be paid back, but it also earns interest. And so as our debt grows larger and larger, the interest that we owe on that debt goes larger and larger as well, and that affects each year's budget proposal for how much money we have to actually spend on other things. So the debt is not free, and it does affect the government. So A is not right. B says the government's budget deficit causes debt to increase. That's true. We know that if the government runs a deficit, that gets added to the already existing debt to result in our new debt, right? So B is definitely correct. C says the deficit causes debt to decrease. That's not true. We just said it causes debt to increase. D says that debt requires the government to pay back more than it has borrowed, and we just talked about this, that's true, because when you borrow money, not only do you pay off the principal, but you also have to pay the interest, and so debt is going to actually cost us more over the long run than just what we borrowed, and so D is not correct either. D is true. E says that the deficit is the amount a government spends above what it brings in, and so that is also right. That's the definition of deficit. And so let's take a look at the previous tutor's answer. In economics, debt is a financial instrument which is used to increase capital and paying a fixed rate of interest on that to the bondholder, like taking a loan from someone else. The budget deficit is a situation where government revenue is less than government expenditure. It means it is a situation where the government spends more than what they get. The government is in deficit, then they create debt for that which increases the debt. In that case, the government needs to pay more than the amount they have borrowed. Therefore, B, D, and E are correct, and that matches up with what we said. Great. I just want to further clarify. To clarify, a deficit is an annual discrepancy where the government's expenditures exceed its revenue. The debt is the cumulative total of all deficits run by a government minus the amount that has been paid off, giving us the total amount that a government owes to debt holders. Okay, solution is correct. Next question. If a price floor is not binding, then A, the equilibrium price is above the price floor. B, the equilibrium price is below the price floor. C, it has no legal enforcement mechanism. Or D, more than one of the above is correct. So price floor, let's take a look at the graph. So you have our demand curve here, we have our supply curve here. A price floor is saying a minimum price for which the price can go no lower. And so we refer to a price floor as binding if it's placed above the equilibrium price, because then it has an effect, right? If it's above the price, if it's above the equilibrium price, it's essentially a tool preventing this market from reaching equilibrium, right? So it's changing the market structure. If it's not binding, then it's basically somewhere where it has no effect, where a price would never get that low in the first place. And that's going to be anywhere below the equilibrium price, right? Because if we have an equilibrium price, we know the market will naturally get there. And if the price floor is below that equilibrium price, then there's no point in having that price floor. It's not binding, it has no effect. And so the correct answer here is B. The equilibrium price is, A. The equilibrium price is above the price floor, where this price is higher than this price floor here. So that's what we mean by a non-binding price floor. Let's take a look at the previous year's answer. Previous tutor said that the equilibrium price is above the price floor. Price floor means that the lowest or minimum price fixed by the government, often it is higher than the equilibrium price of the commodity. Is mentioned as a price floor non-binding, it means that it's set below the equilibrium, or we're going to say the equilibrium price is above the price floor price. A price floor below the equilibrium is non-binding, and hence, as a result of this price control, there will be no distortion in the market. True, right? Good. Now our next question says, which of the following distinguishes the short run from the long run in pure competition? One says that firms can enter and exit on the market in the long run, but not in the short run. Two says that firms attempt to maximize profits in the long run, but not in the short run. Three says that firms use the marginal revenues equal to marginal cost rule to maximize profits in the short run, but not in the long run. And four says the quantity of labor hired can vary in the long run, but not in the short run. And so, let's break this down. So short run and long run, basically the real difference is that in the short run, you have some things that are fixed, and in the long run, everything is variable. So for answer choice one, firms entering and exiting the market in the long run, but not in the short run, the reason for that is partly because of this fixed cost versus variable cost difference, that in the short run, firms are already incurring a lot of fixed costs, and so they can't really exit the market, and firms can also enter the market because it's too short of a time span. But in the long run, that entry in the market is very variable, and so that's going to be one of those things that is definitely different in the short run and the long run. So one seems like a good answer already, but let's take a look at the other ones. Two, firms attempt to maximize profit in the long run, but not in the short run. Well, we know that firms are profit maximizing at all points, not just in the long run, and so that's not going to be the correct answer. Three says that firms use the MR equal MC rule to maximize profits in the short run, but not in the long run. But yet we know that the MR equals MC rule applies. It's the profit maximizing rule, no matter if it's the short run or the long run, it doesn't really matter. So that's not going to be the right answer here. And finally, four, quantity of labor hired can vary in the long run, but not in the short run. And labor is a variable input, not a fixed input, even in the short run. And so it's very possible in the short run for firms to change how much labor they hire. So four is not going to be correct either. So one's going to be the best answer here. Let's take a look at the previous year's answer. Previous year says that firms can enter and exit the market in the long run, but not in the short run. A purely competitive market is characterized by the inexistence of barriers to entry and exit in the market. This attribute allows free entry and exit of firms according to the market's profitability, and subjects incumbent firms to fierce competition due to which they fail to extract positive economic profits in the long run. The entry and exit of firms, however, is not possible in the short run. If incumbent firms are earning positive profits, potential firms get lured into the market to reap the same benefits, and entry takes place in the long run to the point where all firms entering earn zero economic profits. When firms are incurring losses, inefficient firms leave, decrease the market supply, and increasing the market price such that the profitability of firms that stay increases, and eventually all firms are restored to the zero economic profit level. That was a good explanation. I think that covers all the bases pretty well, and we don't have to mark that anymore. And so let's mark that as correct. All right, next question. When inflation rises, people will desire to hold blank. And so I think this refers to the amount that people are holding in savings. And so the question is, do you save more or less when inflation happens? So real quick review of inflation. Inflation occurs when price levels are going up and therefore the value or purchasing power of money goes down. Okay, how does that apply to how much we save then? If we're saying that the value of money or the purchasing power of money has gone down and we expect it to continue to go down in the future, then that must mean that saving money is not a good idea as much as it was before, because the money you put into savings is losing value over time, right? And people put money into savings because they think they can use that money later on or earn returns on that money. And so when inflation is rising, people are going to desire to hold less in savings and more are more inclined to buy or purchase in the current period, right? And so that's going to be our answer for this question. Let's take a look at the previous year's answer. So he said that less amount of physical cash, which I think is synonymous to savings. Let's see what their explanation says. A higher rate of inflation increases the cost of living and reduces the level of real income in the economy. In the short run, the monetary policy is effective to reduce the rate of inflation in the economy by adjusting the rate of interest, but in the long run, inflation is responsible for so many uncertainties. The impact of the high rate of inflation on consumers can be seen with the current demand for products and services in the market. In this state, consumers are inclined to try and purchase more products. Yeah, let's clarify this a little bit more. So, more specifically, inflation means that money held in savings is losing more value, more purchasing power over time, and as a result, people are inclined to change their savings behavior to spend more today. But the solution is correct, so we'll go with that. So next question says, how does demand pull inflation differ from cost push inflation? So again, on the ADAS graph, right, we know that price going up is what inflation looks like. So any change that drives up the equilibrium price from this equilibrium over here is going to be referred to as inflation. And so we have two ways this can happen. Demand pull inflation is basically saying a change in demand is the reason we see inflation. And so if we're dealing with a demand curve, we want price to go up. It's going to be a rightward shift in aggregate demand. So aggregate demand is overshooting aggregate supply in the short run, and so we're moving away from this long run aggregate supply equilibrium. We have a higher price over here, and that's what we see as demand pull inflation, right? The price is being pulled up. Cost push inflation is saying that costs for inputs has gone up for suppliers, and therefore they're able to produce less goods. And so this is going to be a supply side inflation, and that's going to be a decrease in supply in this direction, right? And so if we want supply to decrease, it'll look like, oh, that's terrible. This is what it's going to look like, and we see that there's also this price change over here, an increase in prices due to a shift in aggregate supply. And so that's what we see as the new type of inflation as a result of costs going up. And so let's take a look at the previous tutor's answers to see if they break this down kind of well. Previous tutor says that demand pull inflation is an economic situation which rises of a rise in the general price level in an economy where aggregate demand exceeds aggregate supply at the full level of employment, right? So that's what we see with this rightward shift of AD. On the other hand, cost push inflation is an economic situation where a rise in the general price level in the economy due to an increase in the price of factor inputs, so increasing cost of production, results in a low level of aggregate supply in the economy at the full level of employment. And so that's what we see as a leftward shift in supply. So this is great, good answer, and we're going to verify that as correct. Okay, next question says, we would expect the cross-price elasticity of demand between Pepsi and Coke to be A, positive indicating normal goods, B, positive indicating inferior goods, C, positive indicating substitute goods, or D, negative indicating substitute goods. So really quickly, let's really quickly define the relationship between Pepsi and Coke. Well, we know that for most people, they're going to be substitutes. Now, you don't really care if you have a Pepsi or a Coke, unless you really know the difference. And it's just going to be two different versions of a soda drink. And so if you don't have a Pepsi, you'll gladly take a Coke. If you don't have a Coke, you'll gladly take a Pepsi. So we're substitutes. So we're either dealing with C or D, right? A or B are out. And it's either a substitute, it's either a positive cross elasticity of demand or a negative cross price elasticity of demand. And so if we don't remember the relationship, we can do elasticity of cross price elasticity of demand is equal to, what's the equation? So he says percentage change in quantity of good X divided by the percentage change in the price of good Y. So in this case, is it going to be positive or negative? So if Pepsi experiences, let's say, it's Y, not P, it's P, not Y. Let's say the price of Pepsi goes up. All right, so price of Pepsi goes up, so we're going to say this is a positive change on the denominator. Okay, what happens to Coke? Well, the price of Pepsi goes up. That must mean that the quantity of Pepsi being demanded goes down. The law of demand tells us the increase in price leads to a decrease in quantity demanded. Okay, so the quantity demanded of Pepsi goes down, but people still want soft drinks. So if they're not buying Pepsi, they must be buying Coke. And so the demand curve for Coke is going to shift to the right, and we're going to see a higher demand for Coke as a result of this increase in price for Pepsi. And so the percentage change in quantity is going to go up as well for the Coke market, and so this is also positive, which tells us that we'll have a positive numerator and a positive denominator, and that gives us a positive cross-price elasticity of demand. And so we know that the elasticity of demand is going to be positive, and C is the right answer. So let's take a look at the previous tutor's answer. They also said C. And they said the cross-elasticity of demand is positive in the case of two substitute goods. In other words, when goods are substitutes of each other, then a given percentage rise in the price of a good will lead to a given percentage increase in the demand for a substitute good. A rise in the price of Pepsi will lead to an increase in demand for Coke because the two are close substitutes of each other. Great answer. And that kind of covers all our bases. Okay, next question. A consumer might respond to a negative incentive because it could be a chance to 1. Purchase a very popular item, 2. Avoid additional charges, 3. Buy a good at a cheap price, or 4. Take advantage of a sale. And so this is this idea of incentives, right? And so there's this common misperception in economics where you can only have positive incentives like subsidies, right? But there can also be negative incentives. Incentive is anything that is designed to change the consumer's behavior, right? It's not a mandate that they change their behavior, but it's going to kind of motivate the consumer to change their behavior. And so a negative incentive could be anything like a tax, right? Or a fine or something like that that drives up the price of a good and that decreases a consumer's consumption. We see that with cigarette taxes or sin taxes on goods that we don't want people to buy as much for. So let's take a look at the previous answer choices. One is purchase a very popular item. So that seems more like something that unrelated to a negative incentive. A negative incentive is something we want you to purchase less of, not more of. 2 says avoid additional charges. And so this might be the case. It might be that if you buy a good, the negative incentive will charge you additional money. And so the negative incentive makes you change your behavior so you avoid that additional charge. And so that's a good way of looking at it. So it might be 2. 3 says buy a good at a cheap price, and so that seems more like a positive incentive rather than a negative incentive, so it's not going to be 3. And 4 says take advantage of a sale, and again, that's a positive incentive. It's decreasing the financial barrier to purchasing a good, and so you're making it more likely a person will purchase a good rather than less likely. So 2 seems to be the best answer here, avoid additional charges. Let's take a look at the previous tutor's answer. Previous tutor says avoid additional charges as well. 2 types of incentives that exist in the market are positive and negative incentives. Positive incentives are remunerative incentives. I don't really know what that actually is. That arise from economic actions and hence motivate economic agents to carry out the same, whereas negative incentives are non-monetary incentives that arise with the agent's desire to avoid a specified outcome. An incentive is any factor that induces a particular action from economic agents. Positive incentives for consumers will include consumer surplus, perks of the good or service, the additional perks granted by the producers or service providers, etc., while negative incentives will include mechanisms that discourage a particular activity or action, such as a tax or a punishment. Negative incentives work as consumers tend to avoid additional costs. Good. Nothing to really change or modify there, and the mark that is correct. And I think that's all we have for today, so hopefully that was helpful. We'll be back again on Thursday for some more questions to go over. But other than that, I hope everybody's staying healthy and safe these days. And I'll see